Hi, I'm Mike Cascaglione at Eventus, and I'm here with our company's global head of regulatory affairs, Joe Schifano. We're going to talk about lessons from government enforcement actions against market abuse. So, Joe, could you give us a historical example of an enforcement action against market manipulation? Which one in particular stands out to you?
Well, thanks, Mike, for the conversation. It's very hard to think about one example. We've had a decade now of a number of examples. There have been, I believe, 6 or 7 DOJ cases with corporate resolutions in the last 10 years, and quite a few exchange and regulatory actions for market manipulation, from small to large to getting to the DOJ. So it's hard to pick out one, but there are 2 that I can think of that kind of go together in my mind, and it takes us all the way back to the beginning of this progression following Dodd-Frank. The first is the Scotia case, and that's really important because it was the first case of its kind. It was the first time that someone was found guilty in a criminal case for spoofing, and it kind of put everybody on notice that the regulators meant business and that you should start thinking about what spoofing meant, how to detect it, because someone went to jail. So, or at least got found guilty in a criminal matter. So this is a really important case for people to think about. And for those of us that were putting on training programs and talking to traders about what spoofing was and what to think about, this was an important tool to remind them that it was important to have a healthy conversation around the economic rationale for their trading behavior. I think the next case that really stood out was the Oystacher case. And this stood out because at the time, before it came out, we were still having discussions with traders about what spoofing was. How did you detect it specifically? What was the math behind it? How do you train your surveillance models to say that's it and that's not, without overcomplicating your surveillance procedures? And at the root of that was to understand what was someone's intent when they entered an order. Did they mean to just put up an order and leave it open for some time? Or did they intend to enter an order to trick the market into participating so that they could profit from that? And picking that out on a order by order basis was very difficult. But without going into terrible detail here, the Oystacher case told us that you can infer someone's intent through pattern and practice at a very high level without going into detail. You can infer someone's intent through pattern and practice. And in Oystacher, we started to see that, and how people were perhaps canceling orders fairly quickly after they got a fill on the other side. And the fact that they were doing that quite repetitively, and the fact that they were perhaps using an iceberg order on one side, and that's always where they were getting executed, and canceling on the other side where they were fully displayed. So these are all patterns and practices that traders might have been using that help us detect spoofing, and we could train on that, and we could describe that to people. So there are many examples of spoofing and all kinds of supervisory obligations that were rethought after many of the cases, but I look back to those 2 as very foundational in thinking through a market manipulation case and how you should think about your surveillance.
So these 2 cases, it sounds like, put a spotlight on a particular trading behavior, that is spoofing. So what was the immediate reaction among market participants to these cases?
Well, I think it helped compliance officers generally now point to something and describe it in their training. We spent a lot of time thinking through what those cases meant and how to detect it, and then how to explain it to traders. So I think at the outset, it drove thoughtfulness in surveillance It drove compliance officers to open up more dialogue with their traders. And quite frankly, it drove regulators to be thoughtful about their own surveillance in the marketplace. And I think that's why you had a increase in the number of spoofing cases over time, because now regulators were very focused on it. They could think about it as well in terms of what is it, how to detect it, and that type of investigation and that type of surveillance progressed over time, as we can see by the many cases that occurred.
All right, so back to the present. To you, what are the major lessons from those two cases for today and going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think maybe the most critical lesson is to think about, and I've said this before, think about what an enforcement agency might be thinking about your activity today, 3 years from now. Technology progresses, trading progresses, how people view the market progresses. So at the time, we were kind of looking backwards and saying, well, what is spoofing and how do you detect it looking backwards? And we need to look forwards. And to me, that's a lesson to take on. So I think today, as people look at the history of spoofing cases, and that maybe they're thinking about it in terms of new markets like digital assets, they should be taking the lesson of consider what can happen in the future based on your decisions today. I think that's a critical one. Getting a little bit more in the weeds on the surveillance side, really important to have well-documented audit trails for your procedures in surveillance, why you make certain decisions and accept out certain alerts versus others, document the changes that you make to your procedures. These are all good governance of your surveillance program, and they become critical when a regulator comes and asks about your program or asks about particular trades that you may or may not have detected already.
Okay. Joe, you were a chief compliance officer at a big financial institution. So if a regulator starts an enforcement action against a company, what should a compliance team do? In addition to having the documents ready, as you said, what should they do in the first few days, first few weeks?
Yeah, I'll preface this by saying, please speak to someone in legal first.
That's like the first. Okay,
before you have any conversation.
That's first. Okay, that's the first hour. Okay.
So we'll get past all that good stuff, and let's take this question in the context of the worst case scenario, right? It's the DOJ that came calling. Where will they take things? Sometimes these cases started as something small, but then the CFTC gets involved, and then the DOJ may take a look, and you go from a small case to a big case. So let's be thoughtful about the worst case scenario, and the fact that the DOJ is learned a lot too in this process. In fact, they recently had a policy revision around corporate resolutions for their cases that I think is instructive in this for this question. And the fact is that they're going to be asking over time for more individual accountability for people at the firm. They don't want to just go after corporations. They want to know if someone was individually accountable. And to me, as a former CCO, more importantly, usually in a corporate resolution, a CEO has to certify something, depending on the type of resolution it is. But on an annual basis for some period of time, there'll be some certification. Well, now they might be adding to that a CCO certification. So the question becomes, going back to what you originally asked, is what do I need to do now to make sure I feel comfortable that I can certify my process down the road? When we start thinking about what the future holds, we want to know, what do I need to do now so I can certify my process down the road? What audit trail do I require? What conversations should I be having? What training should I be conducting? And how do I make sure my surveillance is keeping pace with technology? Are there new and improved tools out there that I should be thinking about? And in my mind, that's the critical lesson here. If I have to sign something down the road as a CCO, do I have all the right tools in place now to help me then? I hope not to get there, but if I do, I don't get to go back and retell the story. I have to have it now. So that's how I would answer that question.
Okay. That covers it for today. Thanks, Joe,
Great.
for sharing your insights. For our viewers, learn more about us at Eventus.com. Follow us on social media, and please send us any questions or comments you have about this episode or future ones. All right. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.